Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm really glad that you're with me today, and I am so excited about this interview and the next episode because I've got a very special guest with us today named Shaunti Feldhahn. So Shaunti, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your work.
And just in the way of introduction, guys, Shaunti is a groundbreaking social researcher. She's a best-selling author and a popular speaker. She's a graduate of Harvard University. She's written at least 16 books that I could identify, including The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages, The Good News About Marriage, The Male Factor, The Kindness Challenge, a book called For Women Only, What You Need to Know About the Inner Lives of Men, and a book called For Men Only, A Straightforward Guide to the Inner Lives of Women. And her books have been published in 24 languages and sold more than 2 million copies. Shaunti is a popular media commentator, and her findings have been featured in media as diverse as The Today Show, Focus on the Family, The New York Times, MomLife Today, Cosmopolitan Magazine, and Family Life Radio. And you can find more information about Shaunti's life and work at shaunti.com. That's SHAUNTI.com. So that's quite a resume, Shaunti.
Well, it's really amazing, quite frankly, what God did to make all that happen, because I look back and I can't even believe it.
Right.
It's really been quite a journey.
That's awesome. Can I ask, you were a graduate of Harvard University. What was your degree in from Harvard?
It's called a Master in Public Policy with a concentration in business.
Okay.
How's that for a mouthful?
That's great. And I saw on your website that when you graduated from Harvard, you were an analyst at Wall Street before you unexpectedly became a social researcher and a best-selling author. So how did that transition happen? How in the world did you go from Wall Street to doing what you're doing now?
I know everybody's like, is this what they're studying on Wall Street now? Relationships? No, it's really a fascinating story. And the short version, which is highly relevant to your audience, is that because I was an analyst, right? That was my job, but I was analyzing big Japanese banks and stuff like that. But when my husband and I moved to Atlanta, I had an opportunity, sort of a long story, but I had an opportunity to write a couple of novels. And one of the novels, one of the main characters in the book was a man. And I realized I didn't know how to put thoughts in his head. Like, I had to say what this male character was thinking. And, what do I know about what a guy would be thinking? This whole thing started because I started interviewing men. Like, even if it was just, my husband and I would be out to dinner with another couple, and I'd go to the other guy and I'd say, okay, here's this scene in the book. What would you be thinking if this was you?
Wow.
In this situation? And as these men started to tell me what they would actually be thinking, I was shocked half the time.
Wow.
And often his wife was shocked. Like, the other guy's wife was sitting there going, what? This is what you think? And as I started doing more of these interviews, I realized what I was hearing from them on a lot of the topics that we're going to be talking about here today, as a matter of fact, what I was hearing from these men, it wasn't just that it was surprising. It was really, really foundational stuff. It was things that men weren't thinking like it happened, once every 3 months. Like, these were things that a man was thinking or feeling deep in his heart multiple times a day. And I had been married, I think at that point, about 8 years. And of course, I'm like, why have I not heard this before? And that started this massive study, because that made me put on my analyst hat, right? My research hat.
You got curious about men.
I
Who
did.
are these creatures? What makes them tick? What's going
And
on?
what is going on that in these, really kind of personal situations and some of these like these wonderful godly men, how could you think that,
Right.
and so I ended up doing God just set it up. I ended up doing this massive national survey of men in order to try to figure out what is under the surface in the hearts of our men that often a man wished his wife knew, but he doesn't really know how to explain, or sometimes he just assumes she already knows it. I mean, half the time I'd come home and tell Jeff, guess what I learned? And Jeff tells me later, he was like, what about that did you not get before?
Wow.
And so that's what became the very first of these research-based books, which was for women only, and that's the one that unexpectedly blew it out of the water, became a massive bestseller, has sold 1.5 million copies.
Awesome. I've got my copy right here.
Yes, you do.
And I've enjoyed reading it.
Right,
And I
right.
highly recommend to our listeners that you check that book out for women only. It's an excellent and very insightful book. That the gals check that out.
And men are allowed.
Men are allowed to read it, but there's also a companion book for men called For Men Only that helps us guys understand what's going on inside of women. And
Yeah.
just listening to you explain that, Shaunti, I have this odd tendency or gifting I see in pictures. I don't claim to be prophetic or anything, but as you were explaining that, the picture I saw, I'm picturing a young child who's never seen a saltwater fish tank.
Okay.
So they see this saltwater fish tank and they're amazed. They've never seen this before. So they go up to the aquarium and they smush their nose on the glass, and there's neon yellow fish and neon blue and red fish, and it's so colorful and amazing, and they're fascinating. So it feels like as you did this research, it's like you went up to this portal and you pushed your nose against the glass and you're looking into this other world called men, and you're seeing all these amazing things that you never saw or understood before, and you started connecting the dots. And then you wrote about it, and you're helping women understand what the world of men might really be like.
I love that picture. That's a fantastic way of describing it. That's exactly what I felt like as I was doing the research. And frankly, I think, to be candid, I think that is the reason why that book, but others have hit such a nerve, is because for us as women, um, there are so many things going on inside the hearts of the men in our lives that are so crucial. And we care about our husband, or, in this topic of purity, our son. And we're wired so differently. We don't often understand.
Right.
And it's so life-giving. Even when some things are hard to hear, right, which they can be, it is so life-giving to feel like we finally understand some of what is sort of been underneath the surface this whole time. And so I think that's the reason why for women only, and the other book that I wrote about men in this area, which is called Through a Man's Eyes. I don't know if you knew that I had done that one. But when women read that, that really is a great picture, and a good one.
Would you say, Shaunti, that women in general, by and large, don't really understand men?
Oh, totally. It's a stereotype that men don't understand women, right? So guys, it's to them that's not a surprise. Like, of course I don't understand women. It's actually become a joke, right? Um, which, by the way, in the for men only research that Jeff and I did on women, we actually show men you can understand your wife way more than you think you can. Like, it's actually much simpler. There's some straightforward information. What's a surprise to us as women is that there's this whole world of men that we don't know. Because and I hate to say this out loud, but I'm going to say this out loud. We women, we think we're the ones that are good at relationships. I hate to say that out loud, but we think we're the ones with the interpersonal skills. We kind of think we get people. And it's this huge surprise to find out that there's a whole world that we were completely blind to.
Wow.
About the inner heart of our man.
Wow, that's amazing. So, Shaunti, I can already tell that I have to have you back as a guest because I've got you for like an hour today, and I think I'm going to need to talk to you for like 10 hours, maybe. So
Well, I love what you do, so I'm glad to hear that.
maybe you'll grace us to come back as a guest in the future. We'll see how that goes. So, as I shared with you before we hit the record button, the primary theme of this podcast, of course, is the topic of sex. And more than that, I would say sexual purity. And it's something that a lot of guys struggle with in this day and age with internet pornography and all that stuff. So I've got a list of questions I want to ask. But before we get into any specific questions, could you maybe begin to frame the conversation a little bit? Do you have some introductory thoughts or comments on how we should begin to approach this concept of sex and men and women and how this whole thing works?
Yeah, the most important thing to me is to realize that we care about each other. One of the most crucial things that Jeff and I have found in all these years of research is that no matter what the topic is, whether it's sex, whether it's purity, pornography, whether it has nothing to do with that and is other issues that are going on in your marriage that are causing conflict or whatever, the bottom line is that the vast majority of these issues that cause the heartache between a husband and wife are really usually not the big ticket issues, right? Those exist, like a pornography addiction or her gambling problem or whatever, right? Like those things exist, but those usually don't cause most of the problems. Most of the time, it's that you've got a husband and a wife who really care about each other. And they are trying really hard, even if there's issues, right? They're trying hard. They love each other. They care. They appreciate each other. But because they don't know some of these things about each other, they're sometimes trying hard in the wrong areas and not making each other feel cared for as much as they think they should, after all their hard work. Sometimes, as we'll talk about today, they're really hurting each other and not realize that they're hurting each other. And that's not just, and I'll be frank here, it's not just because there's a problem like he's looking at internet pornography and that is really deeply hurting his wife. There's also, I'll just say it, there's also things that the wife is doing that she doesn't realize that she's doing, wouldn't intend to do, that's hurting his feelings, sort of making him feel completely inadequate and feeling like the pornography is a consolation. And there's no excuse, obviously, for his actions, but there's no excuse for hers either.
Right.
And for us to recognize that there are things we just don't get about each other. And once we know some of these things, once our eyes are opened to what's going on inside the other person, we can suddenly try hard in the right areas and we can avoid hurting each other. And really then those big issues that may still be there, they're much easier to deal with.
Awesome.
Yeah, the big, let me just sort of say the big picture to me that is the most important. There are a couple things that are really critical, but one of the big things when you're talking about sex and intimacy in marriage, and I'm going to focus for a minute on what women don't get about men. And the reason, actually, I want to probably focus more on that than the other way around, even though I know most of your listeners are men. I know you have some women listeners, obviously. But it is absolutely essential for a husband to realize what his wife doesn't get about him, what she doesn't know, so that it helps him have that conversation with her and helps him open up his heart to her in a way that maybe he didn't know how to do before. I know that's one of the reasons, frankly, that For Women Only and Through a Man's Eyes have been so popular,
That's
is because it
awesome.
allows a guy to hand the book to his wife and say, I wasn't able to say this. I couldn't articulate it well. It was kind of clumsy. I've been trying to say it. Here, here's what I've been trying to say. This is my heart.
And by the way, I just want to say I'm really excited about where you're going with this, because the first two questions I had on my list, one for men, one for women, I was going to ask, what do men need to understand about their wives when it comes to sex? And what do women need to understand about their husbands when it comes to sex? So please.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Look, here's the big picture, okay? And this is what we found in the research. And I should say that this is not 100% of couples, right? That it depends on what the question was. It depends on, which study group and all that. But in general, we found this is roughly the case for, 75, 80, 85. There were a couple of like 97% of men.
The large majority of cases.
The
Of
majority.
course, there's always exceptions to every
There's
rule, but
always exactly, and that's the key, is because there are, for example, some exceptions to this where a guy has felt like less than a man because his wife had a higher libido than he did, for example. And that's actually, if you're talking about 75% and 25%, 25% is not a tiny number. That's a pretty huge number,
right.
So, but let's just deal with the majority for the sake of our time here. What we found, big picture, let me start with the misunderstanding that women have about men. We women think of physical intimacy in our marriages as kind of being primarily a physical need. That's the category we kind of mentally put it in. Like, it's a physical need, it's a physical urge. And when you've been chasing kids around all day or you've been working, sleep seems like a physical need too. And you don't realize that this isn't a whole other category for him.
You're talking about her understanding of her husband. She's sitting there thinking, this is a physical need for my husband. But
Correct.
you're saying it's way more than just a physical need.
Right. And so what we found is that when I started on the survey asking the men, what's the importance of this? Okay, for you, what's the importance of sex in your life? What I heard from the men had nothing to do with the physical.
Wow.
Nothing. And instead, what I heard from the men was entirely this enormous emotional need. And it's one that a man can't get met any other way. Although men try in a counterfeit way with pornography sometimes, and it backfires. But the need that the man is feeling is the need that every man has to feel that his wife desires him
Wow.
and that she wants him. And what we found statistically is that if a man feels like his wife desires him, it gives him confidence. It gives him a sense of well-being. And here's what women don't get. It gives him a sense of confidence and well-being in all the other areas of his life, not just in the bedroom.
Wow.
And it works the opposite way as well. If he doesn't feel desired, if he feels like it's a little too easy for her to say, you know what, honey, I'm just really tired. It gives him this feeling like, I must be so undesirable, painful feeling, right? I must be so undesirable. I can't even compete with her pillow, right? And then he has a lack of confidence and a lack of well-being in the other areas of his life. So what I tell when I do a lot of women's conferences, and Jeff and I do a lot of marriage conferences, and what I always tell the women at this point when we talk about this topic is to say, really, truly, that we have this idea that he wants more sex. No, like, don't ever think that again. That's not the point. The point is he has a need, an emotional need to feel desired by me. There's one quote from the survey, one guy who wrote this in. I thought this comment was fantastic. He said, I don't think my wife realizes that what happens the night before in the bedroom absolutely impacts how I feel about myself the next day at the office.
Wow.
And we don't realize it, we as women, because we're wired completely differently, which I want to talk about as well.
That's really powerful, Shaunti. Thank you for sharing these things with us. It feels like it's intriguing because your point is very well taken that most of the time we would automatically think this is primarily a physical need that men have, and I think that's true. But you're saying it's much, much deeper than that. I'm seeing now the metaphor of an iceberg, 5% sticks out on the top, but you're saying there's this big thing lurking underneath the surface, and
Yeah,
that sex really is way more emotional for men, an
correct.
emotional need than maybe most women realize, probably that most men realize. And
Yeah.
by the way, that feels complementary to another question that I was going to ask you later on, but it has to do with this idea. I was going to ask you to comment that not only do men want to have sex with their wife, but they want to know that their wife wants to have sex with them. I think there's a big distinction there.
No, it's huge. It's a huge distinction.
In other words, if my wife has sex with me, that's great, but I want more than that. I need to know. I want to know that she wants to have sex with me.
Well, we actually asked that on the survey. Hold on a second. I'm going to find the number here. I'm looking in the chapter because we actually, okay, here we go. This is a survey question that we asked. Imagine that your wife offers all the sex that you want.
Awesome. Most guys would say great.
Most guys would say great, right? But the question continues, but does it reluctantly or simply to accommodate your sexual needs?
What I might call duty sex.
Duty sex. Yeah. Will you be sexually satisfied? Yes, 26%. No, 74%.
Wow. Which shows the heart of the man. I don't want
It
just sex. I
does.
don't want just duty sex. I want something more than that, which really is a longing in his heart. It's as if he's saying, I want authentic connection. I want emotional connection. I want this to be a real, sincere connection and interaction between the two of us. I don't want
And
just this to be a body to body thing.
right. Well, and here is the proof of the emotional piece of that. Okay? And this right here is what women often miss. We simply, because we're wired differently, which I think we should probably explain as well. Um, but the other question that we asked is, for some men, it is sufficient to be sexually gratified whenever they want. Okay. For other men, it's also important to feel wanted and desired by their wife. How important is it to you to also feel sexually wanted and desired? Because that's what you're talking about, right? It's that she desires me.
Yes.
She wants me, right? 97% of men.
Holy cow. Wow. That's powerful.
That this was the highest degree of unanimity on any question on any of the surveys that we have done. 97% said no, they want to feel wanted and desired. And that's what we women are missing. And that's what so often is a negative signal that we send to our men without realizing it. And it's usually because of the misunderstanding the men have about women and how to approach their wives.
I see. Well, that's just incredible. Can you put words to why you think these dynamics are alive in a man's heart? Why is this important to a man? I think I have a suspicion how I would try to answer it, but I'm curious what you might say.
No, we actually know the answer to that, to some degree. I mean, all of this, there's, I'm sure, pieces of this obviously that we miss, but we know probably one of the big reasons is that men look so confident on the outside, and on the inside they're so vulnerable. There's so much self doubt. We tell when I talk to women's groups or, relationship conferences, I always tell the women that big strong man sitting next to you, you know, he's got the mask going. He's got the facade good, but on the inside, he's wondering, do I measure up? I really want to be a good husband, but am I? I want to be a great dad, but I don't know that I know what I'm doing, and somebody's gonna find out. And so there's this insecurity on the inside that's very different from our insecurity. We women have insecurity too, but it's a very different one. And so he's always looking for signals to the most important people in his life for the answers to that "do I measure up" question. And the most important person to give him that answer is his wife. And so when he's approaching her for sex, and the men said that's his most vulnerable point in his entire life, when he's got his heart out in front of her and she can chop it off.
Right.
That is the moment at which that insecurity is most there. And that is the insecurity that's most being salved and filled and his heart being soothed when she responds to him in that way and says, because that tells him you do measure up. This act of, I want you, I want to be with you, is that affirmation that I know all of you and you are exactly what I need. And that to him, again, women think it's a physical thing. And yeah, of course it is a physical thing, but the importance of it is an emotional one.
Wow, that's really good. What I was thinking, if I could try to put words to it, I'm thinking something like this, Shaunti. I'm going back to the garden when God created humanity, Adam and Eve, and it says, God was having a conversation with himself, and he said, let us make man in our image. So male and female, he created them. So we see the concept of gender, male and female. So now imagine, the concept of a jawbreaker. If you suck on a jawbreaker, it's blue, but then you get that layer off and it goes down to yellow, and you get that layer off, it goes down to red. So imagine if in this metaphor, the jawbreaker represents a man. So if we could peel back layer after layer after layer after layer and go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the soul of man, the psyche of a man at the deepest epicenter of who he is and his identity, his self-worth, his self-esteem, the way he sees himself, the way he feels about himself. This issue of gender is in there at the epicenter, the issue of his sexuality. So if a man feels rejected by his wife sexually, it's like there is no deeper way that he could ever be rejected in any way.
That's a great analogy.
It's like going to wound him. So it makes sense to me that the way he feels at work the next day is predicated upon what happened with him and his wife the night before when she said, no, I don't want to have sex with you.
And women have no idea that any of that is happening.
Wow.
None. We are wired so differently that this is so foreign to us that is one of the reasons why there are so many hurt feelings unnecessarily, because we women are never intending to give the man this wound at this most deep place of his heart. We adore our husbands. We care about them. And we don't realize that he is not feeling cared for. But again, it's back to what I said at the beginning. We are trying our best to show our care to our husband, to show our love to him, and we don't realize we're trying in the wrong areas. We don't realize we're hurting him, and we never intended to. And so that's the key here, is that understanding both sides and what's going on in the heart of the other person and their intentions is everything, because then suddenly you can take it out of the realm. It still may hurt, but you can take it out of the realm of ego, kind of, and that insecurity, and tell yourself she just doesn't realize, she doesn't quite get it. And keep working on that and keep trying to help each other understand.
Hey guys, with that being said, I hate to do it, but I see from the clock that we're out of time for this episode of the Power of Purity podcast. I think you can see that Shaunti has a lot to say. She's done an amazing amount of research on these topics of men, women, and sex, and she's got a lot more to share with us. So I hope that you'll be able to come back next week for part 2 of our interview with Shaunti Feldhahn, Men, Women, and Sex. And in the meantime, if you'd like to check out her website and her books, I encourage you to do that at shaunti.com. That's SHAUNTI.com. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys next week back here for our next episode of the Power of Purity podcast. God bless you guys. Have an awesome week.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.